Did you know that one of the greatest westerns ever made was actually filmed entirely indoors, even though it looks like the wide-open frontier? The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance starred two of Hollywood's biggest legends, John Wayne and James Stewart. But the tension between them wasn't just acting. Director John Ford created a masterpiece about truth, legends, and the price of civilization. But behind the camera, strange decisions, hidden grudges, and unexpected sacrifices shaped every frame. What you saw on screen was powerful, but what happened behind the scenes was even more surprising. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Number 20. The entire movie was shot on a soundstage. When you watch The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, you see dusty streets, wide skies, and the rough landscape of the Old West. You feel the heat, the dirt, the danger. But here's the twist. Not one single scene was filmed outdoors. Every frame, every street corner, every wide shot of the town of Shinbone was built inside a Hollywood soundstage. Director John Ford, who had filmed some of the most beautiful outdoor westerns in Monument Valley, made a conscious choice to shoot this entire film indoors under artificial light. Why would Ford do this? He wanted control. He wanted the movie to feel like a memory, like a fading photograph, not like a bright new Western adventure. The indoor sets gave everything a staged, theatrical quality that matched the film's theme about how legends are created and remembered. The town of Shinbone wasn't supposed to feel completely real. It was supposed to feel like a story being told by someone looking back through time. The art department worked for weeks building the main street, the newspaper office, the saloon, and the ranch interiors. They used painted backdrops for the sky and distant hills. Cinematographer William Clothier lit everything in stark black and white, creating deep shadows and bright highlights that gave the film a timeless, almost dreamlike atmosphere. Actors walked on constructed wooden sidewalks. Horses stood on carefully swept studio floors. Even the stagecoach scenes were filmed inside against projected backgrounds. For a director famous for Monument Valley's red rocks and endless horizons, this was a radical departure. Ford was saying something through his choice. This story wasn't about the real West. It was about the West we choose to remember. The artificiality wasn't a limitation. It was the point. What looked like the frontier was actually a carefully constructed stage, just like the legend at the heart of the story. Number 19. John Wayne hated his role and felt humiliated. John Wayne was the biggest Western star in the world when he agreed to work with John Ford again on The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He expected to play the hero, the man who saves the day, the character everyone admires. Instead, Ford gave him the role of Tom Doniphan, a tough rancher who does the right thing but gets no credit, no glory, and no happy ending. Wayne's character shoots the villain Liberty Valance to save James Stewart's character Ransom Stoddard, but lets Stoddard take all the credit and build a political career on a lie. Wayne was furious. He felt the role made him look weak, outdated, and irrelevant. In the story, his character represents the Old West, the way of violence and rough justice that's fading away. Stewart's character represents the New West, the world of law, education, and civilization. Wayne believed his character should have been the hero, not the man left behind in the dust. He complained to Ford, but Ford refused to change anything. Ford saw the role as deeply tragic and important, but Wayne saw it as an insult. Throughout filming, Wayne was bitter and difficult. He drank heavily between takes. He resented that Stewart's character got the girl, played by Vera Miles, who had been Doniphan's girlfriend. He resented that his character dies alone, poor and forgotten, while Stewart's character becomes a senator. Wayne felt Ford was trying to say that the traditional cowboy hero was obsolete, and it hurt him personally. Years later, Wayne admitted the role was one of his best performances. full of quiet pain and dignity. Critics praised his work, saying he brought real emotion to a man who sacrifices everything and receives nothing. But during filming, he was miserable. The humiliation he felt wasn't just acting. It was real bitterness, and it showed in every scene. What looked like perfect character work was actually genuine resentment captured on film. Number 18. James Stewart was too old for his role, but played it anyway. James Stewart was 53 years old when he played Ransom Stoddard, a young lawyer arriving in the West to start his career. The character was supposed to be in his 20s or early 30s, fresh out of law school, idealistic and inexperienced. But Stewart was clearly a middle-aged man, and the movie didn't try very hard to hide it. He wore his regular clothes, spoke in his usual voice, and moved like someone who had lived a full life. John Ford knew Stewart was too old. Everyone knew, but Ford cast him anyway, and it created a strange effect. Because the movie is told mostly in flashback, with an elderly Stoddard remembering his past, the casting made it feel like an old man remembering himself as still old. It blurred the line between past and present, between memory and reality. The audience saw Stewart as he was, not as the character should have been, and it made the whole story feel like a legend being reshaped by time. Stewart brought dignity and intelligence to the role. His character believed in books, law, and justice. He taught people to read and write. He stood up to the violent Liberty Valance, even though he couldn't handle a gun. Stewart played these scenes with sincerity and conviction, and audiences believed in him despite his age. His gentle, stammering delivery made Stoddard seem honest and vulnerable. The age problem became part of the movie's deeper meaning. This wasn't a realistic story about young people in the Old West. It was a memory, a myth, a story told by survivors looking back. The casting reinforced the film's central question: when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. The audience accepted Stewart because legends don't follow the rules of time and reality. What should have been a casting mistake became a storytelling choice. What looked wrong at first became strangely right. Number 17. Lee Marvin terrified everyone as Liberty Valance. Lee Marvin played Liberty Valance, the brutal outlaw who terrorizes the town of Shinbone. He was supposed to be frightening, cruel, and dangerous. But Marvin went further than anyone expected. He wasn't just acting mean. He brought real menace to the set, and it made everyone, including the other actors, genuinely nervous. Marvin was a tough, hard-drinking man in real life. He had been a Marine in World War II and seen real combat in the Pacific. He carried that experience into his acting, bringing raw aggression and unpredictability to his roles. As Liberty Valance, he swaggered, sneered, and bullied everyone around him. He whipped James Stewart's character bloody in one scene, and the intensity felt real and disturbing. On set, Marvin stayed in character between takes. He would stand in the corner, glaring at people, muttering threats, keeping the energy dark and tense. Some crew members avoided him. Even John Wayne, who was nobody's idea of a coward, kept his distance. Marvin understood that fear is contagious, and if he made people afraid of him in real life, it would show on camera. The whipping scene was especially hard to film. Stewart had to be dragged, beaten, and humiliated, while Marvin stood over him, laughing and mocking. Stewart later said Marvin's performance was so intense that he felt genuinely frightened during those moments. The camera captured real fear in Stewart's eyes and real cruelty in Marvin's face. There was no need to fake it. The emotion was already there. Ford let Marvin run wild because it served the story. Liberty Valance needed to feel like a real threat, a force of chaos that couldn't be reasoned with or controlled. Marvin delivered exactly that. When Valance finally gets shot, the audience feels relief, not just for the characters, but for themselves. The villain wasn't just defeated in the story. He was exorcised from the set. What looked like brilliant acting was also real intimidation, carefully aimed and skillfully used. Number 16. John Ford was cruel to James Stewart. During filming, John Ford was one of the greatest directors in film history, but he was also known for being cruel, especially to actors he wanted to push harder. He yelled, insulted, and humiliated people in front of the crew. He believed that breaking someone down emotionally would bring out deeper, more honest performances. James Stewart, who had worked with many directors and was known as one of Hollywood's nicest men, was shocked by how Ford treated him. Ford called Stewart an amateur. He mocked his acting choices. He told him he was too soft, too polite, too weak for the role. In front of everyone, Ford would stop a scene and say, "That's terrible, do it again, and this time, try acting." Stewart, who was a major star and an Oscar winner, didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being treated this way. At first, Stewart thought Ford hated him. He considered quitting the movie, but then he realized Ford was doing it on purpose. Stewart's character, Ransom Stoddard, was supposed to feel humiliated, out of place, and powerless in the rough frontier town. By making Stewart feel those things in real life, Ford was preparing him for the role. The confusion, hurt, and frustration Stewart felt on set came through in his performance. Ford used this technique with many actors, but he was especially tough on people he respected. He believed that comfortable actors gave comfortable performances. He wanted tension, uncertainty, and raw emotion. So he created those feelings by being harsh and unpredictable. Stewart later said he understood what Ford was doing, but it didn't make the experience any easier. The result was one of Stewart's finest performances. His Stoddard is gentle but determined, scared but brave, wounded but hopeful. You can see the pain in his face, the doubt in his eyes. It wasn't just acting. It was real emotion shaped by Ford's ruthless direction. What looked like naturalistic character work was actually emotional manipulation, carefully orchestrated by a director who understood suffering and how to use it. Number 15. The famous line. Print the legend. Defined the entire film. The most famous line in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance comes near the end. A newspaper editor hears the truth about who really shot Liberty Valance, and he decides not to print it. Instead, he says, "This is the West, sir. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend." Those words became one of the most quoted lines in cinema history, and they perfectly captured the film's central theme. John Ford and screenwriter James Warner Bella built the entire movie around this idea. The story is about how myths are created, how heroes are made, and how truth is often less important than the stories people want to believe. Ransom Stoddard becomes a famous senator because everyone thinks he killed the outlaw Liberty Valance. But he didn't. Tom Doniphan did, from the shadows, and then walked away without claiming credit. The line, "Print the legend," was revolutionary for Westerns. Most cowboy movies celebrated heroes and clear-cut morality. They showed good defeating evil in fair fights under the sun. But The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance questioned all of that. It asked, what if the stories we tell about the West aren't true? What if the heroes we worship are built on lies? What if history is just a collection of agreed-upon myths? Ford himself was part of this process. He had spent decades making Westerns that glorified frontier courage, rugged individualism, and masculine violence. But by 1962, he was older, more thoughtful, and more skeptical. He began to see that his own films had created legends that didn't match reality. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance was his way of admitting that and examining what it meant. The phrase entered popular culture. Politicians, journalists, historians, and artists quoted it. It became shorthand for the way societies choose which stories to remember and which to forget. It acknowledged that myths serve a purpose, even when they're not entirely true. What looked like a simple piece of dialogue was actually a philosophical statement about storytelling, memory, and national identity. Number 14. Vera Miles replaced Natalie Wood at the last minute. Vera Miles played Hallie, the woman caught between two men, Tom Doniphan and Ransom Stoddard. But she wasn't John Ford's first choice. Ford originally wanted Natalie Wood, one of the biggest young stars in Hollywood at the time. Wood had just finished West Side Story and was at the peak of her career. Ford thought her beauty and vulnerability would be perfect for Hallie. But there was a problem. Natalie Wood became pregnant and had to withdraw from the project. Ford was frustrated because he had designed the role specifically for her. He needed a replacement quickly, and he turned to Vera Miles, an actress he had worked with before, and tried to build into a major star. Ford had a complicated relationship with Vera Miles. He believed she had enormous talent and could have been one of the great leading ladies of Hollywood. He had cast her in The Searchers and groomed her for stardom. But Miles chose family over career at critical moments, and Ford resented it. He felt she had wasted her potential. When he cast her in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, he was giving her another chance, but also punishing her with a limited role. Hallie is a crucial character in the story, but she doesn't have much to do. She starts as a waitress in Shinbone, gets educated by Stoddard, and eventually marries him. But her big emotional scenes are few, and much of her story is implied rather than shown. Miles played the role with quiet dignity, suggesting deep feeling beneath a calm surface. She showed a woman who makes a practical choice, marrying the successful man instead of the one she might have truly loved. Ford barely spoke to Miles during filming. He gave her minimal direction and kept her at a distance. She later said it was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of her career. But her restrained, melancholy performance worked perfectly for the character. Hallie is a woman who lives with compromise and unspoken regret. What looked like a simple supporting role was actually a complex portrait of sacrifice, shaped by the tense relationship between actress and director. Number 13. The black and white cinematography was a deliberate, artistic choice. By 1962, most major Hollywood films were shot in color. Audiences expected it. Studios demanded it. Color was modern, exciting, and profitable. But John Ford insisted on filming The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance in black and white, and the studio reluctantly agreed. Ford made this choice for artistic reasons. He wanted the film to look like an old photograph, like a faded memory. Black and white gave the movie a timeless, almost ghostly quality. It made the story feel like something from the distant past, separated from the present by more than just years. The high-contrast lighting created stark shadows and bright highlights, emphasizing faces, emotions, and moral conflicts. Cinematographer William Clothier used classic Hollywood lighting techniques. He placed strong key lights to sculpt faces and create depth. He used shadows to suggest danger, mystery, and hidden truths. In scenes with Liberty Valance, the lighting became harsh and dramatic, making the villain look more menacing. In quieter scenes, the lighting softened, creating intimacy and warmth. The black and white photography also saved money. Ford was working with a smaller budget than his earlier epics, and color film was expensive. Shooting in black and white reduced costs and allowed Ford to build elaborate sets indoors. But the financial necessity became an artistic advantage. The lack of color forced the audience to focus on faces, gestures, and compositions instead of being distracted by visual spectacle. Critics and audiences noticed the unusual choice. Some thought it made the film feel old-fashioned. Others recognized it as a bold artistic decision. Over time, the black and white cinematography became one of the movie's defining features. It separated The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance from typical westerns and gave it a unique, almost literary quality. What could have been a limitation became a signature. What looked like a step backward was actually a leap forward in visual storytelling. Number 12. John Wayne and James Stewart never became friends, John Wayne and James Stewart were two of the biggest stars in Hollywood, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance was the only time they played major roles together in the same film. Fans expected them to bond, to enjoy working together, to become friends. But it never happened. They remained distant and polite throughout filming, and they never developed a real friendship afterward. The two men represented different styles, both as actors and as people. Wayne was a larger-than-life presence, a conservative who believed in traditional masculinity and American strength. He walked with a swagger, spoke in a tough growl, and built his career on playing heroes who solved problems with fists and guns. Stewart, by contrast, was softer, more intellectual, and more liberal. He played gentle, thoughtful characters who relied on decency and idealism. On set, they barely spoke to each other outside of scenes. Wayne thought Stewart was too refined, too careful, too much of a Hollywood insider. Stewart thought Wayne was too rough, too political, too set in his ways. John Ford, who loved to stir up tension, did nothing to bring them together. In fact, he probably enjoyed the distance between them because it mirrored the conflict in the story. Their characters in the film are opposites. Wayne's Tom Doniphan is a man of action, solving problems with a gun. Stewart's Ransom Stoddard is a man of words, solving problems with law and education. The tension between the characters reflected the tension between the actors. You can see it in their scenes together. They don't quite connect. They respect each other, but they don't understand each other. In later years, both men spoke respectfully about the film and about each other's work, but they never became close. They lived in different worlds, believed in different things, and approached their craft in different ways. What looked like two legends sharing the screen was actually two men keeping their distance, and that distance gave the film an extra layer of authenticity. Number 11. Woody Strode's role highlighted racism in the Old West. Woody Strode played Pompey, Tom Doniphan's loyal friend and ranch hand. Strode was a black actor and former professional football player, and his role in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance was small but significant. John Ford included the character to quietly acknowledge the presence and importance of black people in the Old West, something most Westerns ignored. Pompey is always at Doniphan's side. He works on the ranch, helps in the climactic shootout, and stands by Doniphan even when everyone else forgets him. The character is dignified, capable, and brave. But he also occupies a secondary position, always in the background, never at the center of the action. Ford was showing both the reality of racial dynamics in the Old West and the limitations of how Hollywood portrayed them. Strode and Ford had worked together before on Sergeant Rutledge, a film that directly addressed racism and injustice. Ford respected Strode and wanted to give him meaningful roles. But even Ford, a progressive director by the standards of his time, couldn't fully escape the racial assumptions of Hollywood. Pompey is a supporting character, and his relationship with Doniphan, while affectionate, is still defined by unequal power. In one powerful moment near the end, Pompey is one of only two people who attend Doniphan's funeral. The town has forgotten the man who saved them, but Pompey hasn't. He remains loyal, even in death. Strode played the scene with quiet dignity and sorrow, and it's one of the most moving moments in the film. Ford didn't make a big statement about race, but he made a subtle one. He included a black character as a full human being, not a stereotype. He showed friendship across racial lines, even if that friendship existed within an unjust system. It wasn't enough, but it was more than most Westerns offered. What looked like a minor character was actually a quiet challenge to the erasure of black people from Western history. Number 10. The stagecoach robbery scene was tense and symbolic. Early in the film, Ransom Stoddard arrives in Shinbone on a stagecoach. Liberty Valance and his gang rob the stage, beat Stoddard, and leave him for dead. The scene is brutal and shocking, setting up the central conflict of the story. But it's also carefully constructed and full of symbolic meaning. John Ford staged the robbery indoors on a soundstage, using a rocking coach, projected backgrounds, and tight framing to create the feeling of motion and danger. The scene is claustrophobic and violent. Valance drags Stoddard out, mocks his law books, and whips him savagely. James Stewart played the scene with real fear and humiliation, and Lee Marvin played it with sadistic pleasure. The robbery represents the clash between civilization and chaos. Stoddard arrives with books, legal documents, and ideals. Valance represents lawlessness, violence, and the rule of the strong. The beating is more than physical. It's an attack on everything Stoddard believes in. His law books are torn and trampled. His faith in justice is shattered. He learns immediately that the West doesn't care about his education or his principles. Ford used the scene to establish the stakes of the entire film. If Stoddard is going to survive and succeed, he will have to find a way to bring law and order to a place that rejects both. But he can't do it alone. He will need help from people like Doniphan, who understand violence and know how to fight it. The scene also sets up the central lie of the story. Later, everyone believes Stoddard defeated Valance in a fair fight. But the audience knows that Stoddard was helpless against Valance from the beginning. The contrast between the weak, beaten man on the stagecoach and the legendary hero people later celebrate shows how myths distort reality. What looked like a simple action scene was actually a statement about power, violence, and the stories we tell about both. Number 9. The shootout scene was filmed with precise symbolism. The shootout between Ransom Stoddard and Liberty Valance is the most famous scene in the film, and it's staged with careful symbolism. Stoddard, who can barely handle a gun, faces Valance in the street. The audience knows Stoddard has no chance. But when the guns fire, Valance falls dead, and everyone believes Stoddard killed him. John Ford filmed the scene in 2 parts. First, we see the public version, Stoddard and Valance facing each other, shots fired, Valance falling. It looks like a classic Western showdown. But later, in flashback, we see the truth. Tom Doniphan was hiding in the shadows with a rifle. When Valance raised his gun to kill Stoddard, Doniphan fired first. Stoddard never hit anyone. The legend was born from a lie. Ford used lighting and framing to tell the story. The public version is brightly lit, staged like a theatrical performance. Everyone watches. It feels like a myth. The private version is dark, shadowy, and hidden. Doniphan is barely visible. The real violence happens in secret, while the fake violence gets remembered. The shootout represents the film's central theme, the difference between truth and legend. Stoddard becomes a hero for something he didn't do. Doniphan, who actually did it, remains unknown and unrewarded. The public wants a story they can believe in, so they create one, regardless of the facts. The scene also marks a turning point. After the shootout, Stoddard's career takes off. He becomes a politician, a senator, a symbol of progress and civilization. But Doniphan's life falls apart. He loses the woman he loves, burns down his own house, and dies poor and forgotten. The man who used violence to protect civilization is destroyed by it, while the man who opposed violence builds a career on the illusion of having used it. Ford staged the scene with precision and restraint. There's no dramatic music, no slow-motion heroics. Just 2 shots, 2 different truths, and a lifetime of consequences. What looked like a simple gunfight was actually a commentary on heroism, deception, and the myths that shape nations. Number 8. John Ford made the film as a farewell to the Western genre. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance was John Ford's way of saying goodbye to the Western genre he had helped create. He had been making Westerns since the silent era, crafting the visual language and mythic storytelling that defined cowboy movies for generations. But by 1962, he knew the world had changed, and so had he. Ford was 67 years old when he made the film. He had lived through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. He had seen America transform from a rural frontier society into a modern industrial superpower. The values he had celebrated in his early westerns, rugged individualism, masculine violence, the taming of the wilderness, seemed outdated and questionable. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is full of endings. The Old West is dying. The gunfighter is obsolete. The frontier is being replaced by towns, schools, and laws. Tom Doniphan, the classic Ford hero, is left behind by history. The future belongs to people like Stoddard, who solve problems with words and institutions, not guns. Ford was also questioning his own legacy. He had spent decades creating the mythology of the West, but now he was admitting that much of it was fiction. The line, "Print the legend," could apply to his own films. He had printed the legend for years, and now he was revealing the gap between legend and truth. The film has a melancholy, reflective tone that's different from Ford's earlier westerns. There's no triumphant music, no sweeping landscapes, no clear moral victories. Instead, there's sadness, ambiguity, and regret. The characters win and lose at the same time. Progress comes at a cost. Ford made a few more films after The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, but none were westerns. He had said what he needed to say. He had built the myth, then taken it apart, and shown the human cost underneath. What looked like just another western was actually a director's final statement about the genre, the country, and his own life's work. Number 7. The funeral scene was the emotional heart of the film. Near the end of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Senator Stoddard and his wife Hallie returned to Shinbone for the funeral of Tom Doniphan. Only 2 people attend, Pompey and the coffin maker. The man who saved the town and made Stoddard's career possible is buried in a pauper's coffin, forgotten and alone. John Ford shot the scene with stark simplicity. The coffin sits in a bare room. Pompey stands quietly in the corner. Hallie places a cactus rose, Doniphan's gift to her from years ago, on the coffin. No one speaks. The silence is heavy with loss and regret. This scene is the emotional heart of the film. It shows the true cost of progress and civilization. Doniphan sacrificed everything, love, happiness, recognition, so that others could build a better world. But the better world has no place for him. He dies alone, poor and forgotten, while the man he saved becomes rich and famous. Vera Miles played the scene beautifully. Hallie doesn't cry, but her face shows deep sorrow. She knows she chose the wrong man. She married Stoddard because he represented the future, but she loved Doniphan, who represented something real and honest. Placing the cactus rose on his coffin is her way of saying goodbye and admitting the truth. John Wayne doesn't appear in the scene. He's already dead, but his presence is felt. The empty coffin represents everything his character gave up and everything the world lost when it moved on from men like him. Ford was saying that progress always leaves someone behind, and the people left behind are often the ones who made progress possible. The funeral scene is quiet, but it carries enormous emotional weight. It forces the audience to question whether Stoddard's success was worth Doniphan's suffering. It asks whether civilization built on lies and forgotten sacrifices is truly civilized. What looked like a simple burial was actually a statement about memory, gratitude, and the hidden costs of history. Number 6. The Cactus Rose. Became a symbol of lost love, the cactus rose appears twice in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and both times it carries deep emotional meaning. Early in the film, Tom Doniphan builds an addition onto his ranch house for Hallie, the woman he loves. He picks a cactus rose and gives it to her, a symbol of his love and his hopes for their future together. But that future never happens. After the shootout with Liberty Valance, Hallie chooses Stoddard instead of Doniphan. She sees Stoddard as educated, progressive, and destined for greatness. Doniphan represents the past, and she wants the future. Heartbroken, Doniphan burns down the ranch addition he built for her, destroying his own dreams. Years later, at Doniphan's funeral, Hallie sees the cactus rose again. Someone has placed it on his coffin. She picks it up, remembers, and gently places it back. The moment is silent but devastating. The rose represents everything Doniphan offered her: simple, honest, real love. She chose something else, and now it's too late. John Ford used the cactus rose as a visual motif, a recurring image that gains meaning through repetition. The rose is beautiful but fragile, just like Doniphan's love. It grows in harsh conditions, just like the feelings that survive in a violent, changing world. It's a small, quiet symbol, but it carries the weight of the entire story. Vera Miles played the funeral scene with restrained emotion. She doesn't cry or collapse. She simply touches the rose and remembers. That small gesture says everything about regret, missed chances, and the roads not taken. The cactus rose becomes a symbol of lost love, sacrificed dreams, and the quiet tragedies that history forgets. Ford understood that powerful symbols don't need explanation. The cactus rose appears, disappears, and returns, and the audience understands its meaning without a single word of dialogue. What looked like a simple flower was actually the heart of the film's emotional truth. Number 5. The newspaper office represented the power of storytelling. Much of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance takes place in the Shinbone Star newspaper office, where Dutton Peabody, the drunken but principled editor, prints the stories that shape the town's understanding of events. The newspaper office becomes a symbol of the power of media, storytelling, and the creation of myths. Peabody, played by Edmund O'Brien, is a fascinating character. He's an alcoholic and a fool in many ways, but he also believes in truth, justice, and the power of the written word. He publishes articles attacking Liberty Valance and defending Stoddard, even though he knows it will bring violent retaliation. And it does. Valance's gang beats him savagely and destroys his printing press. But Peabody survives, and so does his press. With Stoddard's help, he rebuilds and continues publishing. His newspaper becomes the voice of civilization, law, and progress in Shinbone. The stories he prints shape how people understand events, and eventually those stories become history. John Ford was making a point about the relationship between journalism, history, and myth. Newspapers don't just report events, they interpret them, frame them, and decide which version of the truth to tell. Peabody's decision to print the legend at the end of the film isn't cynical. It's a recognition that stories have power, and sometimes the story people need is more important than the literal facts. The newspaper office is also where Stoddard teaches Hallie and others to read and write. Education and journalism go hand in hand. Both are tools of civilization, ways of replacing violence with words, chaos with order, ignorance with knowledge. The printing press becomes as important as the gun in shaping the future of the West. Ford filled the newspaper office with detail and character. The cluttered desks, the old press, the scattered papers all create a sense of lived-in authenticity. This is where the real work of building a society happens, away from the dramatic shootouts and public showdowns. What looked like a simple set was actually a symbol of how civilizations are built, one story at a time. Number 4. The film questions. Whether progress is worth the cost. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is ultimately about progress and the price we pay for it. Shinbone transforms from a lawless frontier town into a civilized community with schools, elections, and institutions. Stoddard leads this transformation, bringing education, law, and order. By every measure, the town is better off. But the film asks, Was it worth the cost? Tom Doniphan pays the highest price. He uses violence to protect the people building civilization, but civilization has no place for men like him. He loses the woman he loves, his home, his purpose, and eventually his life. He dies forgotten, and the society he helped create doesn't even remember his name. Hallie also pays a price. She marries Stoddard and becomes a senator's wife, but she seems sad and distant. At Doniphan's funeral, we see that she still loves the man she didn't choose. She gained status and security, but lost something real and true. Even Stoddard pays a price, though it's subtler. He builds his entire career on a lie. Everyone believes he killed Liberty Valance, but he didn't. He's a fraud, and he knows it. His success is built on someone else's sacrifice, and he has to live with that knowledge forever. John Ford was questioning the narrative of American progress that his earlier films had celebrated. Yes, civilization is better than chaos. Yes, law is better than violence. But the transition from one to the other isn't clean or simple. Real people suffer. Real sacrifices are made, and the people who make those sacrifices are often forgotten. The film doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't say progress is bad or that the old ways were better. It simply shows that every gain comes with a loss, every advance leaves someone behind, and every legend hides a more complicated truth. What looked like a celebration of civilization was actually a critique of how we remember it. Number 3. John Ford's declining health affected the production. John Ford was not a healthy man when he made The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He was 67 years old and suffering from various ailments, including problems with his eyes. He wore a patch over one eye, partly because of a real medical issue and partly as a trademark. His vision was deteriorating, and it affected how he worked. Ford's physical condition influenced his decision to shoot the film on sound stages instead of on location. Outdoor filming required travel, unpredictable weather, and long days in the sun. Ford didn't have the stamina for that anymore. Indoor filming allowed him to control the environment, work shorter hours, and manage his health while still making the film he wanted. His declining health also contributed to the film's reflective, melancholy tone. Ford knew he was nearing the end of his career. He was thinking about legacy, memory, and what gets left behind. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is full of characters looking back, remembering, and trying to make sense of their lives. That's exactly what Ford was doing. Despite his health problems, Ford remained a demanding and precise director. He knew exactly what he wanted and insisted on getting it. He pushed his actors hard, controlled every detail, and refused to compromise his vision. His experience and instinct allowed him to work efficiently, getting what he needed without wasting time or energy. The cast and crew respected Ford's determination. They knew they were working with a legend, possibly for the last time. There was a sense of reverence on set, even when Ford was being difficult. Everyone understood they were part of something important, a final statement from one of cinema's greatest artists. Ford's health continued to decline after The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He made a few more films, but none with the same depth or power. This film represented the culmination of his thoughts about Westerns, America, and his own life. What looked like just another production was actually a farewell, shaped by the knowledge that time was running out. Number 2. The film was a box office disappointment, but became a classic. When The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance was released in 1962, it didn't perform well at the box office. Audiences were confused by its tone, disappointed by the lack of action, and unsure what to make of its ambiguous message. It wasn't a hit. Critics were divided. Some recognized it as a profound work of art, a mature reflection on myth and reality. Others thought it was slow, talky, and old-fashioned. John Wayne's fans were upset that his character didn't win. James Stewart's fans were confused by the downbeat ending. The film fell between genres and audiences, not quite satisfying anyone's expectations. Part of the problem was timing. In 1962, Westerns were changing. Movies like The Magnificent Seven had brought new energy and international flair to the genre. Italian directors were starting to make spaghetti westerns with stylized violence and anti-heroes. Ford's film felt like it belonged to an earlier era, even though it was actually ahead of its time in its themes. But over the years, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance found its audience. Film scholars recognized it as one of Ford's masterpieces. The line, "Print the legend," became famous. The film's exploration of truth, myth, and memory resonated with viewers who watched it again and again. It became a fixture in film classes, retrospectives, and critical studies. Today, the film is considered one of the greatest westerns ever made and one of John Ford's finest achievements. It's praised for its intelligence, emotional depth, and willingness to question the myths it helped create. What looked like a failure became a triumph, but only after time allowed audiences to catch up with Ford's vision. Number 1, the entire story is a lie, being told to journalists. The most important and strange fact about The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is that the entire story is a lie. The film opens with Senator Stoddard returning to Shinbone for Tom Doniphan's funeral. Journalists ask why a famous senator would come back for an unknown man's burial. Stoddard tells them the story, the whole story we watch unfold in flashback. But at the end, after Stoddard reveals the truth, that he didn't shoot Liberty Valance, that his entire career is built on a lie, the newspaper editor refuses to print it. This is the West, sir. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. The journalists tear up their notes and walk away. The truth dies with them. This means the story we just watched, the true version of events that Stoddard confessed, will never be told. The public will continue believing the legend. Stoddard will remain a hero. Doniphan will remain forgotten. The film we just watched exists only in that one conversation, and then it's suppressed. John Ford was playing a brilliant narrative game. He showed us the truth, but within the story, that truth is buried. We, the audience, know something the world inside the film will never know. We're given privileged information and then told it doesn't matter, because legends are stronger than facts. Bonus fact, the film's title was almost changed. Multiple times before The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance reached theaters, studio executives debated changing the title. They worried it was too long, too complicated, and didn't clearly communicate what kind of movie it was. They suggested shorter, simpler alternatives like The Liberty Valance Story, or just Liberty Valance. But John Ford refused every suggestion. Ford insisted the title was essential to the film's meaning. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance isn't just a title, it's the central question of the entire story. Who was the man who shot Liberty Valance? The title promises an answer, and the film delivers one, but then reveals that the answer everyone believes is wrong. The title also has a rhythmic, almost mythic quality. It sounds like a legend, a story passed down through generations. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance could be a ballad, a tall tale, or a campfire story. The formal, complete phrasing gives it weight and importance. It sounds like history. Ford understood that titles matter. They set expectations, create tone, and become part of a film's identity. A generic title would have reduced the film to just another Western. The specific, evocative title he insisted on made it something more. A meditation on heroism, mythology, and the stories we choose to believe. The studio eventually gave in, and the film was released with Ford's original title. Over time, it became iconic. People quote it, reference it, and instantly recognize it. The title has entered the language as a phrase representing the gap between truth and legend. Ford fought for many things during his career: creative control, final cut, casting choices. But his insistence on this particular title shows how deeply he cared about every element of storytelling. Even the name mattered. Even the first words mattered. One stubborn choice preserved the film's integrity and helped it become timeless. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is a film about the stories we tell, the heroes we create, and the truths we choose to forget. John Ford made a Western that questioned Westerns, a legend that exposed legends, and a myth that admitted it was a myth. He gathered great actors, staged powerful scenes, and crafted a story that has only grown deeper and more relevant with time. Behind the scenes, the film was shaped by aging stars, difficult personalities, bold artistic choices, and a director saying goodbye to the genre he helped build. What looked simple was actually complex. What seemed old-fashioned was actually revolutionary. The film proved that the best stories don't just entertain. They make us think about how and why we tell stories at all. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.